Hi, I'm John Rogers. I created the show Leverage and wrote Transformers, and you're listening to Genretainment.
Hi everyone, this is Genretainment at sci-fi-pulse-radio.com. We're your hosts, Marx
and Julie, and what you just heard at the beginning of the show was a snippet from the theme song from our web series, Reality on Demand, a song composed and performed by our friend T. Sean Hardy. And you can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com. Today on Genretainment, we speak to actor, writer, and director John Cabrera, who co-created the hot new web series called H+, the digital series, which is produced by Bryan Singer, who you probably know from his work on the X-Men movies and Superman Returns, among other things.
Yeah. Now he talks about expanding his career from acting to writing and directing, also about his years acting on Gilmore Girls, how he co-created the web series that glimpses into our possible transhuman future, and how he convinced Bryan Singer to produce H+. He also talks about his previous web series, The Homes. And that's just warming up. We cover so many things with him. Many of you may remember him from his years acting on Gilmore Girls, but you find out...
Gilmore Girls! Well, to the last season.
But you find out after just a few minutes of talking to him that he is just as much a writer and director as he is an actor.
Yeah, so now let's get to our featured interview with John Cabrera.
You're listening to Genretainment. Today we're talking to the creator of the web series H+. Big budget web series that you probably have heard about by one of the producers, actually Bryan Singer, one of the producers of the X-Men movies.
Yeah, so go ahead, even though we've been talking a little bit, if you could introduce yourself and your background in filmmaking, and I know you've got a strong background in acting, but just a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, I'm John Cabrera. I am one of the two creators of H+, the digital series. And yeah, my background is, I guess, most of the past decade, you'd say I was more of an actor than sort of behind the camera. Although I'd probably say my heart has always lived behind the camera. I've been doing sort of my own little indie projects and music videos and films and short films and whatnot for at least, the past 12 years or so. But, my bread and butter over the last decade is probably mostly as an actor. I was on Gilmore Girls for 5 years playing the role of Brian Fuller. And towards the end of that run is when I really made a push for, turning that behind the camera stuff into an actual career. So the past 4 years since Gilmore went off the air, I've directed a web series called The Homes, and then most recently my series H+ just launched on YouTube. That project actually predates The Homes. Started working on that with Cosimo in 2006, and yeah, that's sort of my little quick journey through the entertainment industry.
Now, you've also got a musical background, because I loved Gilmore Girls.
Oh,
and you were in the band. So what's a little bit of your musical? And obviously you were talking about The Homes. That has a lot of emphasis in music as well.
Well, I get, in truth, my musical background is that I like music.
That's the first requirement.
Yeah, I mean, people I always used to get that question, about how much of what they saw on Gilmore Girls was actual real musicianship, and the answer is very little.
Very little.
Yeah. I mean,
well, see, I kind of thought, well, that might be how it goes until I knew about The Homes, and I thought, well, maybe he's got a little bit more background than I realized.
I mean, I love music, and it's very similar to the creators of Gilmore Girls, Amy Sherman Palladino and Dan Palladino, both huge music nerds. I'm sure everybody who watches Gilmore Girls knows that they are big music nerds. So yeah, they created that band, and I played one of the roles in that. I played the bass player in the band, and the idea was like, look, the bass is not that difficult of an instrument. He should be able to get it. And if you watch early episodes still had me sort of playing. Like, we would rehearse early on, and I learned the chords on everything, like the fingering for every song that we ever did on the show. I always had to learn that.
That's great.
But it was only after maybe the first season that they started just using the bass player. The bass player who was teaching me all of that stuff was always off camera. Early on, he was off camera just to sort of help me through it, but eventually he was just, off camera actually playing it because they wanted it to sound live. So all of the stuff on the show was actually recorded live. Like none of it was edited over.
That's what I was wondering. It sounded it, so I assumed you just picked it up.
Yeah. No, he was standing literally right off camera. I think that there may be a couple of episodes where if you actually follow my bass guitar's cord, you'll follow it like on the ground and then see that it's not actually plugged in.
See, I was paying more attention to the drums. That's what I used to play.
But I love music, and the Holmes is, and I love indie rock, and music is a big inspiration for the work that I create, the stuff that I write. I'm always sort of writing to music to a degree. Although lately, like I've been a little slack on my music, but during the Holmes, I was listening to a lot of indie rock, and up. Like, even before pitching the Holmes, I was, and that was sort of part of the inspiration for where I came up with the idea. And that was actually my first time in a studio actually recording an album. So I wasn't really a musician, I was more of a producer, but I was also sort of like learning how to be a producer, not really knowing music, but with a cast of actors, like those actors in the Holmes, they were all musicians with a capital M. So I'm like trying to give them notes on the way I want it to sound, and like they're just laughing at me, like at one point I'm like, yeah, I mean, I just feel like it was just a little flat, and like two of them looked at each other and they're like, actually, it was a little sharp.
You're like, no, I meant flat from the key above it.
I was like, basically what I mean is that it didn't sound good. How's that?
That's great. So were you the one that you just kind of came up with this idea for the Holmes, then you had to go find people who were much more musical, or was this something that you'd already kind of worked out with somebody ahead of time?
No, I mean, it was like, I had this idea, hey, why don't we make it really difficult on ourselves and make the musical, I had this idea for, a story about a young girl who, at the beginning of the story, she's relocated by her parents to Pittsburgh, and she's miserable because she misses all of her friends back in LA, and she comes up with this plot to get back to LA using this young sort of garage band that her neighbor has, convinces them that she has a record deal for them back in LA, and convinces them that if they can get her back there, that that if they get her back there, that she has this record deal for them. And then over the course of the series, which if you watch it, it sort of plays out like a film, over the course of the series, 10-minute episodes, she starts to sort of, deeply bond with this group. And by the time she gets back to LA, she realizes that she doesn't really have anything in common with all of those people that she left back there and with their sort of parties and LA sensibility. And, I just thought it would be great if somehow we could bring real music into the actual project. And so I decided I would try and do a musical, and then it became the challenge. That became the challenge. Like, are you going to cast musicians or are you going to cast actors? And luckily we ended up getting the best of both worlds. I mean, we put out a casting call for actors who knew how to play particular instruments, and we saw hundreds of people came in for it. It was really extraordinary, and we got amazing musicians in every one of those roles. I have to say, I was very, very, very happy with the cast.
That's great. So basically, your rule number one for starting and producing was you have to be a masochist.
Yeah.
Make it as hard as possible.
Yeah. That is definitely like the story of John Cabrera. I always seem to like no, that's not hard enough. Let's do this instead. That's definitely not going to almost kill you.
Yeah. So the idea of her going back from, you said, what was it, Pittsburgh to LA, does that in any way have anything to do with in your personal experiences? I think you're from Miami, then you went to Chicago, and then over into LA. Did you have any kind of culture shock when you first got to LA?
No, not to LA, because LA has a lot of similarities to Miami. right?
Yeah.
So I grew up in Miami. I went to college in Chicago. If there was any real culture shock, it was when I got to Chicago. I went from like Hurricane Andrew, which had been just a couple of years before in Miami, and dealing with all that, to my first year in Chicago, negative 70 degrees with the wind chill. It was like the coldest in over a decade, and my hair freezing on the way to class because it was still wet from the shower.
Oh no, yeah, your hair's got to be dry no matter what it looks like when you go outside.
I know, and so but I will say though, like, culture shock, but also, I was coming from the suburbs of Miami. It was amazing. I loved every bit of that culture shock. I loved the snow. I'd never seen it before. I loved the art. I loved the Metropolitan. I loved the, everything about that experience of going to Chicago is sort of what turned me into the artist that I am. Like, that guy from Miami, I was just a kid, and then it was in Chicago that I really sort of was exposed to art and culture and experimentation, and it's where I met the best friends of my life, including Sean Gunn, by the way, who played Kirk on Gilmore Girls, and he and I both got on that show actually like serendipitously. It wasn't totally, it was like pretty coincidental how we both ended up on that show, but we've been best friends since the 90s. He and I, we've been.
He's hilarious too.
So then when I went to LA was a little bit more of, okay, I've been in Chicago for almost a decade. The novelty of all of that is sort of worn off. I'm now a new person. I want to explore all of these things that I've learned, and I'd like to do it in an environment where I'm not getting blown into the street, because of the wind, and it's, not so brutally cold. A lot of my friends had moved to LA, and so I decided it was a great place to go. I had a network of support there, and I came to LA. The irony is that I was sort of, poor and struggling in Chicago, like an artist, like most people in Chicago, and I came to LA after years of struggling, and like walked right into a show at one of the biggest theaters here in LA, and shortly after got an agent, and then shortly after that I was on Gilmore Girls, and then I started doing my own things and started developing my own projects and working with great people. And my journey here in Los Angeles has been really it's been great, and it's been varied, and a real adventure. Not that I don't love my time that I had in Chicago, but I always look back at Chicago as sort of my training ground. It's where I learn everything that I apply now.
Now, like you mentioned, H Plus has been in development for quite a few years. Can you tell us a little bit about how it developed, the idea and the concept of it, and how were you able to pitch it and get Bryan Singer on board? Well,
in 2006, I was, I think probably I was looking for something that I could, some exciting project to do. I knew that Gilmore Girls was almost off the air, and I really, like I said, I really wanted to transition out of acting and into writing, directing, etc. And so I think that my head was in the space to sort of find a really fun project. And I don't know what it was. This whole idea of a world connected by nanocomputers sort of came to me one day. I was actually driving through a parking lot here in LA, and the radio in my car went out, and I remember there was a song playing on the radio that I really loved, and I stopped the car and backed up traffic, and they were beeping at me, and next thing I'm like, I'm just thinking about, I'm down in this lot, no reception, and I'm thinking about, how vulnerable that felt, and I guess there was something in that, and that I wanted to explore. And shortly after, I sort of had this idea of a world connected by these nanocomputers, which is not really, it's sort of analogous to what the world we live in today. I mean, technology like this implant in the series is so embedded in our humanity that it may as well be underneath our skin. I took that idea to Cosimo, who I'd been sort of springboarding with on a variety of other ideas, trying to find a project for us. And I said, what do you think? And he was like, this is really cool. Why don't we just start exploring what a world like this would be? Rather than coming up with a story, why don't we just start coming up with characters who may have experienced an event like this? The event being that this world is connected by implanted computers, and all of a sudden one day something happens and all of them die. And little by little, as we started investigating a scenario like that and all the people affected by that, this story world started to develop. Not necessarily a story, but a lot of different little stories. After about, I'd say, 6 to 8 months of just doing that, working all the time, researching, developing a pitch for this world as as something. We didn't even know really what. We started taking it around, and we showed it to film people. We showed it to TV people. We didn't really know what it was going to be. And we sat down with Bryan and his folks at Bad Hat, and they loved it. They felt like it was, the way that we wanted to tell the story, which was in a non-linear fashion, with a variety of different characters spread out around the world in these almost like vignette styles, that was something that certainly could work on television. At that point, we really only had a show like Lost as an example of something that was working in that regard. But they felt like because this story was so much about the internet, that it probably would be smart for us to at least explore it as an internet thing. And Bryan and his producers there really wanted to get into developing for the internet. We showed it to Warner Digital. They loved it. And pretty soon we were hired to write it. And at that point, we hadn't put pen to page yet. Everything was just sort of a world, a concept. So for the next 4 years, Cosmo and I figured out how to write this script as a story. And we approached it from the standpoint of, we want this to be expansive. We want this to feel big. Why don't we try and merge all these little stories that we had developed into this one larger story and present it less as a linear TV style narrative and a little bit more like an interactive internet style ARG, for lack of a better word.
Alternate reality game.
Yeah.
I think we skipped ahead a little bit. I just realized we probably should explain the concept of H Plus a little more for our listeners who may have not watched it yet.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
It's like, what's this thing about?
What?
Could you explain a little bit about the concept of the show and also what H Plus means?
H Plus is it's set in a near future very similar to today as 20 years ago looks like today. And in this future, 33% of the world population, approximately the same number of people who use cell phones today, have retired their cell phones, their laptops, their computers in favor of a new implanted computer that allows them to connect to the internet via their nervous system. And we essentially start the story with something going wrong, and that 33% suddenly, inexplicably, dies. Well, inexplicably. I mean, we assume that it has something to do with a virus that's on this network. And we spend the rest of the series trying to figure out what happened, jumping forward in time, jumping backwards in time, seeing what this world was looking like as it was accelerating towards this event, as well as seeing what this world looks like in the aftermath of the event. And understanding who all of these players are, how they are connected, because when we begin the story, all of the characters that we focus on in these little mini ensembles that we've set up don't seem to have a lot of connection to one another. And as we progress throughout the season, we start to see that they are, in fact, very connected.
And what does H Plus mean?
H Plus is the sort of internationally recognized symbol for a cultural, political, scientific movement known as H+, known as transhumanism. Transhumanism is essentially the idea that we, as a species, as well as individuals, are going to be upgraded, that our culture is going to be upgraded, that our bodies themselves are going to be upgraded through technology, through advanced forms of technology like genetic engineering, network technology, computer technology, robotic technology, and nanotechnology, some of which will find its way inside of our own bodies. I guess the short version is transhumanism is about the blending of man and technology, the true merging of man and machine.
Did 48 episodes. They're about 3 to 6 minutes each. and you do this non-linear format where you do jump around through time and you have different characters you follow. It's almost sort of like a non-linear anthology type show. It's very different from anything I've seen before in that approach, writing-wise. So when you co-wrote for this, how did you approach it structure-wise?
Yeah, did you set out to do that, or did it just sort of seem to break up easier that way, or?
Well, like I said, I mean, what we had before we started writing the script was a very, very dense mythology, right? We had all these characters. We had a timeline. We had events that took place all over this timeline. We had essentially like a Bible for this world, right? For all the events that happened on this world for about 20 years, right? Now, mind you, that the series that people are seeing here, these 48, really only covers about 12, 13 years of that longer timeline. But we had all of that mapped out, even deeper mapped out before we started writing. And we did want to tell this story in a nonlinear fashion, and we did want to tell this story in a very expansive manner. So we felt that telling this in these short installments and doing it in a way that we sort of pick out different spots on the timeline that felt right to each other, even if they weren't right next to each other, that there was a really interesting way to tell a story in that. Very early on, we really got set on this idea. I don't know if people have picked up on this, to be honest with you. I haven't really seen a lot of chatter about it, but I don't know if you guys realize, but every odd episode of the series takes place before the event, and every even episode of the series takes place after the event. So we flip-flop back and forth. So episode 1 is before, episode 2 is after, episode 3 is before, episode 4 is after. And we don't really have a set rule for where before or where after, but we did sort of settle on that structural conceit very early on. And it's probably because we wanted to have something structurally to hang on to, because when we started writing this, we really didn't know how to write a series like this, because there wasn't really any other series that we could compare it to. I'd say the closest literary form to what we're doing is probably the serial in literature, right? Like the way that Charles Dickens wrote all of his novels. They were published as small chapters, installments in magazines, right? So that's not too different from the way that we are telling this story, except that we're not really telling it in order, right? And we're telling it from the perspective of different people. And so in that way, I don't know, I mean, it has a little bit of a modern feel. I mean, sort of, I mean, not to get all sort of literary with this, because I think ultimately the series is a piece of popcorn entertainment, for lack of a better word. But, it sort of reminds me a little bit of like the way that Faulkner wrote As I Lay Dying, where we sort of see the story told through the eyes of a variety of different people. And we thought that would be a really great way to tell a really big story with, I have to say, not a really big budget. We needed to take what in studio terms is a shoestring budget. I realize that in web series terms is a massive budget, but in studio terms, which we had to work very often in studio terms, it's a very small budget, and we had to take that and make it look like it was this massive world. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, this non-linear jumping around to different places really helps us do that.
And you jump around different countries even.
Yeah.
May I ask what the budget is?
It is in the millions, in the low millions. I have to say, you can probably find it online. I just am not sure. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it. It's one of those things.
Would we be able to ask?
I'm sure you can find it online. It's in the low millions.
Well, I love how you brought in that about Dickens, because now it's, oh gosh, we got to read that in literature class and this and that. They don't realize it's like when this came out, it came out in serials, and people were on the edge of on pins and needles waiting for the next installment. It was huge entertainment, and people would get it and they'd read it out loud. Like
totally, and I And I have to imagine that there were plenty of people that were having the kind of gripes that people have with H+, in that they watch and they're like, what? Oh, I have to wait for another freaking week for more of this? This is maddening. And you know what? Yeah, that's part of the style. That's part of the genre. You know, that's, to be honest with you, I feel like it's part of the fun. You know, it's not for everybody. But when a writer writes something, you know, typically unless they're being paid very well to write something that they don't want to, that they don't really care about, you know, which is not the case here, because we were not getting paid a lot of money for this. You want to write something that you would love, right? Like, I wanted to write a series that would be the type of series I would love for somebody to write for me. And I like waiting, and I like savoring, and I like rewatching, and I like exploring and examining and, you know, and reconfiguring. And I think that the short episodes allow for that, especially in this nonlinear format, allow people to take multiple episodes and rearrange them, put them in a different order. And I think that if they were longer than they are, it would be much harder. It'd be much harder to do that. And definitely if they were longer than they are, we'd have to make less of them. And so then it would start to feel a little bit more like a traditional TV show. And that's something that we wanted to avoid. We didn't want to do TV on the web. There's so much TV on the web. In fact, it's starting to mature to the point now that we are seeing stuff that looks very much like TV on the web, not just from a quality perspective, but is actually starting to get up there in terms of the length. You know, I mean, Stuart Hendler went on from H+ to do Halo, and Halo, those are about 20-minute episodes. They really feel like TV. But a lot of, you know, entertainment on the web, because they don't have the money, they have to resort to doing short pieces, short episodes, and sort of squeeze a TV-style narrative arc into that 5 minutes, you know? And we just thought that for a story like this, it just wouldn't work. And so instead, many of these episodes, they don't have an arc. They feel like they've just been plucked out of the middle of something. They feel like a puzzle piece more than an episode.
Well, and that's part of the fun of it, is that with web series as a form of entertainment is in its infancy. It's sort of, we always compare it to like the Wild West, where it's just like, you know, you can't make up your own rules when you're dealing with television, but you can make up your own rules with the web.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if that will always be the case. You know, I mean, I think eventually the studios, the ones with the big money, they're going to figure out how to make big money on the internet. Once they figure that out, then they'll start doing a lot of that. And then we'll be locked into one or two particular forms on the internet. And people will watch those because they will be the best looking stuff, and it will be much harder for independent artists to do stuff on the internet because people just won't watch it. They'll look at it and say it looks cheap, and they'll watch the really high quality stuff, which they'll only have a limited number of formats. The way that we only have a limited number of formats on TV. We have the half hour and the hour. That's it. On limited format in film, we just have the 3-act structure, usually told in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But right now we are at this really interesting point on the internet where everyone, including the studios, are exploring, and it's allowing creators like me and Cosimo and Stuart to tell stories in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to tell it, you know? And I think that in that way, it's the best place to be telling stories right now.
Yeah, it's very much like the early years of the silent film, and then also the early years of when they started going into sound, and it was like everyone's just kind of, there were so many different models out there and different kind of ways it was done until after a while people started setting rules on it. But exactly. in the earlier years, it was like you could have seen anything.
Exactly. And there's something really wonderful about that. I mean, like, you know, the people who lived through that, they got to see a lot of different things, you know? Yeah. And I think that people take that for granted right now, that how many different styles and different things that we can see right now because we are in this transitionary period. But I'm telling you, eventually, I believe that will not be as much the case. Eventually, we will sort of lock into formats, and it will be much harder. I mean, of course, there will always be people experimenting, but, you know, being able to get so many eyeballs on that experimentation, that is something that is very unique to the time we live in.
what would you suggest to other web series creators whenever they're going to structure a story? Would you suggest, like you did, throw out the rule book and just make something, experiment and make something unique for the web?
That works for your particular project, or do you tend to think shorter's better? Do you have any kind of recommendations for somebody?
Because we always get web series people, when we talk privately, a lot of times they'll ask us, are the shorter stuff doing better? Is the longer stuff doing better?
This is surprisingly a hot topic for debate.
Yeah, it is. You know what? And it is. And here's the question: like it's very hard to judge for sure, right? Like if H+ is getting any one single criticism, it is people who are unhappy with the length. That they're like, this is too good to be 3 minutes, or they're just like, I can't get into watching something like this and it end after 3 minutes. I just can't do it, which is odd because so many can watch it in other formats that I really do think that it is partly because they see it and they say, this looks too much like TV, and yet it cuts out before it's supposed to, because the way I see this type of content being is a half an hour to an hour long, right? That is the big question. The question is, how many of those people who are very vocal about it in the comments on YouTube, how much does that represent the larger number of people who are actually watching the episodes, right? Because, only a fraction of the people who watch the video actually comment on the video. So it's really hard to say. I mean, the episodes are doing very, very well. Like from a viewing perspective, people are watching. The series is growing steadily. It's gaining subscribers steadily. It's getting, a lot of thumbs up. It has a very high percentage. So, we look at both sides and we say, like, what's right here? Like, could we perhaps make a 10-minute episode and then all of a sudden find the comments are extremely positive, but our viewing numbers have drastically dropped? You know what I mean? Like, these are the types of things that everyone is still trying to sort of figure out. Now, I went from the homes being 10-minute long episodes to H+ after being 3.5, 4 minute long episodes on average, right? So I actually went backwards. Like most people are sort of growing, like they're getting bigger. And so I guess to answer your question, I'd say, the Homes was very much a traditional style narrative. It was presented like little mini episodes. If anything, I feel like I wrote the Homes like each episode was an act of television, right? So it was like I was sort of writing them to the commercial. But when we were writing H+, which, a large portion of that came after the Homes as well as before the Homes, we weren't really thinking about length so much as what the story really asked of us. And in the Homes, that's what the story needed. It needed to be linear and it needed to be longer. Like, there's no way it would have worked as 3-minute episodes, the Homes. No way. They had to be 10-minute long episodes. And then with H+, I really do genuinely believe that for what we wanted to do, which was create this sort of larger puzzle of little pieces and these little bite-sized moments in time and geography, that the shorter works better. I really do believe that. So I would say my advice to people who are trying to figure out what story they want to tell, that they should be asking what the story, what format the story is asking for. And then again, I think that because we are telling a story in a different medium than television, that we should not be thinking of it like television, right? I'd say try not to jam a television hour into 10 minutes or a television half hour into 5 minutes, but rather think of them as perhaps the pieces of an hour-long piece of content, right? Like I said, I thought of the Homes a little bit more like the acts of a TV show rather than as little TV shows in and of themselves.
It's really difficult to do a complete story arc, like a 3-act structure in 10 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Yes, you see it happening sometimes. I think that The Guild is probably the series that does it better than any that I've seen so far, where the episodes really feel like episodes. They feel like episodes, but they also sort of feel like, gosh, if this series had more money, this series would be a half an hour long. This would be maybe an hour long, Whereas I know that some people feel that way about H+. They see, but I feel like that's more the production value that they're actually seeing, like the look of H+. That they say this could be a TV show. And I think that there is a TV show that lives in the world of H+, but it wouldn't look nothing at all. I mean, from a production standpoint, maybe, but from a structural standpoint, it would feel nothing like what we've gotten in this web series.
Yeah.
And that brings up a point. First off, is there going to be another season? Or are you guys thinking about that? Or any kind of spin-off? And
we're about to start writing the second season.
Okay, great.
Now, will we get a second season? That is a completely different story. Warner Brothers has invested in seeing what the next part of this story is, right? And so Cosmo and I are writing that for Warner Brothers. But the studio model, it really was a big learning experience for me to be working as a writer in the studio system, being that my only experience up until then was my own projects. But it certainly has its pros and cons. Obviously, it's obvious pros, the quality that you get and the everything that comes with the Warner brand. But the cons are things are slow, things take a long time. Projects can fall apart at any step of the way. So we're certainly hopeful. Right now, nothing seems to indicate that Warner Brothers wouldn't want to move forward with a season 2. If everything was similar to what they were sort of required to invest the first time around. The numbers are really good. YouTube is really happy. Right now, I'm very optimistic that audiences will see the next part of this, which, as I said before, we already sort of knew, because when we started writing this, we had this massive world with lots of things happening in a very long timeline, and we were only able to put a certain amount of it in there because we really didn't have that much time and resources for that. The entire series, 48 episodes, is about 3.5 hours. And part of why we are stretching it out the way that we are is we wanted to take that 3.5 hours and really turn it into an experience. We wanted to turn it into something that communities could form around and that people could really pick apart together and anticipate together, right? Everyone could get excited about the next episode together. We think that that's a really important component to the series, the community aspect of it. It's part of one of the themes of the actual story itself, how we as a global community come together, through network technology.
Now that you mentioned the online community, I'm curious about how you all approached promotion and the advertisement and getting people to not only watch the show, but feel like a part of the community, online community watching it.
That has been, there's two answers to that question. One is very simple, which is the Warner, and this goes to one of the pros, the huge pros of working with the studios. The Warner marketing and publicity power is huge. Warner Brothers has relationships with hundreds of publications and blogs, and so being able to get the word out early through the studio would have been very difficult to do without a studio, and I believe was hugely influential in getting so many people aware of a property that did not exist. Right? Their last show, the last big project that Warner did was Mortal Kombat.
Oh yeah.
Mortal Kombat, 17 million views it has on its first video. Then that drops down to 5 million on its second video, which is pretty well, that's pretty common, I'd say. Web series in general. But we're looking at that and we're thinking, like, no way are we going to be able to compete with that. I mean, this is a 20-year-long brand, hugely popular brand that's centered around video games, which, of course, we all know YouTube is heavily populated with a video game community. So we were really starting, we had Bryan's name, we had Warner's power and brand, but we were really starting from zero with H+. And if we hadn't had the Warner brand behind this, pushing it, getting it out there to publications, I really don't think that it would have gotten the awareness that it did. So that's the answer that's the first part of the answer, which is, there was a lot of actual studio marketing that went into the series. The other half is social media and how social media and communities has played a part in this, and that has been a lot more slow growing. I'll admit, I would love to see the series really explode from a community standpoint more than it has so far. And I think that part of that is people, are still trying to understand what the series is. I think that we are slowly changing perception away from this is TV on the web to this is an experience. We also, your three major marketing tools for community building are Facebook, Twitter, and now Google+. All three of them, they function differently and they have a different purpose. What we've been finding is that, believe it or not, Google+, sort of the newest kid on the block, and, arguably the fewest number of really active, engaged people on it, actually turns out to be, it may potentially be the big game changer for content like H+, because we're seeing the most intelligent dialogue there. We're seeing people really doing what we'd hoped that people would do with the series, which is pick the story apart, try and figure the story out, talk to each other about the story, not so much the format or the themes. The themes are great. I love it when people talk about the themes and get it, but that people tends to sort of digress into like bickering about your views on religion and this, that, and the other, and then it sort of gets away from the real point. And I think that's the danger of comments. That's the double-edged sword really with comments on YouTube, which is that they are typically a place where people just troll or say something is awesome or get into arguments about their philosophies of life. Whereas what we're seeing on Google Plus is people really actually trying to figure out this puzzle, which is something we're not seeing on Facebook. On Facebook, people, the same posts that we post on Google+, on Facebook we get 10 times or 5 to 10 times the number of likes on Facebook as we get +1s on Google+, but 5 times the number of actual dialogue and interaction on Google Plus than we get on Facebook. And Facebook has 10 times the number of subscribers as Google Plus does. So there's something really special happening with Google Plus, and we're really excited to see if perhaps as the series goes into this second half, if we start to see communities really starting to form there. But, we've always believed that this series is going to be about audience building, that this was not going to be a viral series. It just doesn't really have the recipe for virality. Virality starts from communities, and H+ didn't really have a community. It's building a community. And so we always sort of knew that what our goal would be is to build our subscribership, which we have been, and foster the small communities that are forming. And hopefully, if we do see a season 2 of H+, or even, like, God willing, like many seasons, that over that time, we will develop a dense, big, exciting following, sort of the way that the Guild developed its following, after its first few seasons.
Yeah, when you said the conversation descends into bickering, I was thinking a different word that starts with the B, but it wasn't bickering. But you're right. Yeah. It often does, and it can be a little frustrating because you worked so hard on your episodes of, your show H+, and then to see 5 posts down, someone's made it political, religious, and something else, and attacking the person who posted before him, and it's like, no!
I know, and it's like, and it's just the smallest things will start it, and it's funny because we have so many small things in the series, like story-wise, right? Like all these like tiny little nuances that we were really we want people to like really chew on, figure out, and talk about. But like the stuff that they focus on, it's just sometimes it's just absolutely ridiculous, and it almost sometimes it feels like it's meant to start an argument, know.
I think some people do. They just
I was going to say, the thing is, you can. I think probably most people who like something are not prone to commenting.
Right.
And then people who happen across what you put out there and they're having a really crappy day,
Yeah.
You're just there.
Yeah. So,
I always, maybe it's self-preservation on my part, but every time I see, if I I've got it in my head. Look, if someone's going to comment on our stuff, it's probably going to be negative, but it isn't personal, you know?
Yes. And I've sort of gotten to that point too. And I also, I mean, even in the nastiest, ugliest, trolliest comments, I've found some value. I mean, I don't want to respond to it because I don't want to encourage that kind of stuff. But, there's certainly value in it. And there's certainly value in this discussion about whether or not H+ should be, even in this format, a little bit longer than it is. I don't believe that in this format it should be 20-minute episodes. I don't believe that it should be 15-minute episodes, but perhaps there is a version of this that is closer to 10-minute long episodes. I don't know. So I definitely get there is some value from the comments, but what I really want to do, and we're trying this now. I mean, I have a vlog out that I've done already, and I'll be recording a new vlog this week. That'll be like the second vlog. And what we're really going to be trying to do more than anything is the people who are looking for a place to talk about the story, and we see them every once in a while in the comments on YouTube. You'll see one lone person like ask everybody, whether they noticed some particular mysterious plot point, and it just gets buried underneath tons of other ridiculous comments. So it's sort of like what we'd love to do is find all of these wanderers looking for a place to discuss the series and focus them towards some of our social communities that are forming. And I think, right now, the winner is looking like it's Google+. So we'll probably be trying to focus people towards the Google+ community.
That's a good idea. Keep us updated on that and how it goes.
You're the first web series creator who's really talked that much about Google+.
Yeah. So we're kind of like, ooh, let us know how that works.
I mean, I have this feeling that 2013 is going to be an important year for Google+, right? Like, sort of the way that 2007 was huge for 2008 was huge for Twitter. I have this sense that 2013 is going to be big for Google+.
Such an exciting time for science fiction, because so much of our daily lives now, not that long ago, would have been considered science fiction. And so, now it's a really great time that you're able to experiment with the new format in kind of the wild west of the web, but you're also able to really delve into science fiction at a time when, it's science fiction now. In 2 years, it could be reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, back in the 80s, science fiction was really more spaceships and aliens and I mean, I guess we still have a lot of that still today, but I think with the advent of the internet, science fiction really has taken on this new sort of transhumanist slant in which we are envisioning what a world would look like in the future with all of this new internet technology, right?
It feels so much more personal to people now than it used to, I think.
Yeah.
We've had such a communication revolution in the last 10 years or so. And what's next? Where's it going next?
I don't know. I'm always wary of it. I love science fiction, but I'm like, that could bite us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's sort of the big question in H+, right? It's like, we may feel uncomfortable. Like, I think everybody, to a degree, feels some degree of what if this all went wrong, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't prevent us from buying the iPhone. It doesn't.
No, we're risk takers.
Yeah, we don't buy an iPhone and say, this could be leading down a bad path. We don't think like that, right? And I think that's part of the story of H+, which is that, you have this world that all accepts this implanted computer. I'm sure they all know that there are problems that could arise. They all are aware of hacking and and whatnot. But we are a species of risk takers. We've always, and it's one of the really interesting things about the human condition or the human species, really, as it relates to progress, and that is we always seem willing to pay the costs associated with progress, the bumps along the way, the Hiroshimas, the Black Plagues.
Yeah, the Industrial Revolution.
Big bumps that have happened because of technology, we accept them. And I think the reason we do is because deep down, we understand that those bumps may be a part of the larger story. We always seem to get past them, right? Like all of the things that led to the spread of Black Plague in the 14th century, new methods of urban planning, new methods of trade, livestock management, all of these things which really created this cocktail of mass, extinction, or not extinction, but like, mass death in Europe. We got past, and we still have many. We still use some of those methods, or many, or all of those methods. Really, today we've just built on them. So the question is, do we somehow, underneath all of this, like, is there something deep in the human condition that understands that this is part of the story, and that we sort of have to accept some of these bumps in order to get past them and to create great things? I mean, it's sort of a dark way of looking at it, but certainly our past has shown that we are not invincible, or that we are vulnerable. I'd say because I guess I would say that to a degree we have sort of shown that we are invincible, that we kind of get through everything, but that we are vulnerable to these things happening. So I would have to assume that as we move forward, we are probably in store for one or more crazy, horrible things happening along the way again.
More story material.
Yeah. Then, if there's anything else you want, any other projects you're working on you want to promote,
go ahead. Let us know anything that's going on.
Oh, goodness. Well, I definitely want to promote the heck out of H+. So,
yeah.
definitely, like, if there's been anything interesting here about this, that, anything about this interview in regards to H+ that has interested you, and you want to see the series, go to youtube.com/H+ digital series. That's HPLUS digital series. There's also a website, really great interactive website with all of these sort of extra pieces of content that I mentioned. That's hplusdigitalseries.com. Other than that, I'm actually working on, aside from H+2 second season, I'm working on like 3 other projects, but I haven't announced them yet. But I'm likely one of them is going to be announced relatively soon. But they're actually really, really big, exciting projects, studio projects. So not in the web series. Well, H+ is in the web series, and there's another one that is probably going to be in the web series, but some feature stuff. So you can find me online very, very easily. I'm very accessible. On Facebook at facebook.com/John Cabrera, twitter.com/John Cabrera. You can find my Google Plus just by going to Google and typing in John Cabrera. I'm pretty much anywhere at any of the social networks as John Cabrera. If you are on a social network and you want to hear me talking about any number of things related to the stuff I'm working on, or ideas or whatnot, find me online. I'm very social. I love to talk. I love meeting new people.
Hi, I'm Blake Calhoun, the creator of the web series Pink and the sci-fi web series Continuum, and you're listening to Genretainment Radio.
Thanks to John Cabrera for agreeing to the interview, and we do wish H+, the digital series, great success. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm curious about a possible second season, and we also look forward to seeing what the writer side of John Cabrera comes up with next.
Yeah, me too. So that's it for today, Genretainment. Check back next week with all new guests. Join us back right here on this channel at sci-fipulseradio.com next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific.
Until next time.